Okay, looks like everyone is here. Thanks so much for attending this LinkedIn Live presentation on the state of agency positioning and AI search readiness. So here we go. Now, I'm sure we all feel this way to some degree every now and then. The market is just changing so rapidly. There are so many new agency entries into the marketing agency universe that it's hard to stay on top of the best way to set your firm apart and the best way to optimize your site for AI search readiness. So that's what today's presentation is all about, and hopefully will prove of help and of value to you. So just some quick background. My name is Mark Snyder. I am founder and CEO of RSW US. I started the firm here in the States in 2005. We are the nation's leading outsourced agency new business firm, representing over 40 agencies across the state and operating as their outsourced new business team. We're in the business of finding qualified leads for our clients, setting meetings for our clients, better positioning them in the market, and helping them get closer to close. We're continually either creating or engaging with new tools to help our clients have an edge as we look for new business opportunities for them. And at the end of last year, we created an AI team built from within the four walls of RSW, and now are employing AI to our benefit and our clients' benefit in numerous ways, some of which we'll discuss today. So with the advancement of platforms like Claude and ChatGPT, we're seeing more agencies developing their own proprietary platforms designed to benefit their clients' business and in many ways their own businesses. But we've seen very little use of AI to help strengthen their own marketing and positioning of their agency brand. And at the beginning of this year, consequently, our AI team at RSW developed a model to help agencies change all of that. A model specifically designed for marketing agencies to better solidify their positioning and improve searchability of their websites. And we did this because what we've historically seen since the start of the business in 2005 is a lot of sameness. And just a couple of cases in point. Anderson Partners was one of our early on clients, and I remember during the kickoff meeting with their team in Omaha, their team being so proud of the fact that they had created their own positioning statement for their agency. The problem was it could have been for any agency. It was very generic, not terribly ownable, a lot of stuff about them that sounded just like any other firm in the market. And I experienced a similar outcome in 2007. I'll never forget presenting to a small agency network group called McCann. We were in Kansas City at the time, and part of the presentation involved having the 15 members take an acetate that was used on an overhead projector, and write down their agency's positioning. Of the 15 agencies there were maybe two at best that stood out, and it was in part because their agency was focused on a specific industry, so what they said sounded somewhat different from everybody else. And really not much has changed over the years. While agencies do a great job, generally speaking, of helping their clients find their way to a more compelling and differentiating place in the market, they don't do a really good job of taking their time to deep dive into what makes their agency so unique and so much better than the rest. But just to provide a current example, so whenever we kick off with a new client, an outsourced agency, new business client, we ask them to fill out an intake form. And two of the questions we ask them is how they would describe their agency to a prospect and what's unique about their firm. And most often it results in very little that truly sets them apart. As we can see here from an actual kickoff intake document, the way this agency describes themselves could be the way just any agency talks about themselves and what makes them unique. We asked, how would you describe your business to a prospect? And they said, independent, full-service marketing agency specializing in strategy, research, media, and creative. Sound familiar? And when we asked any unique or proprietary processes or methods, they were honest. They said, we don't really have a proprietary process. However, we are tactic agnostic and we choose to be audience first. We make it our mission to fully understand our client's audience before making any marketing or strategy recommendations. So again, I've heard that a lot over the years. It isn't too terribly differentiating, and isn't going to help an agency when they're calling on a prospect for the first time. Not going to help them, in setting themselves apart. And so all these things that this agency provided, they're fine, they're important, but again, they aren't going to be things that you want to shout out on your agency's website or talk about when your new business director first reaches out to engage with the prospect. Definitely not something that we like to do with our client programs. These things that they're all best left for a deeper and longer conversation where you can talk about your positioning and share some of these expected things that every agency should have and should do. Clearly, clients want agencies that are strategic and expect them to be just that. The same goes for being part of the client's team and being nimble and agile. All really good things, but not the key things that will separate you out from other firms. And many of the agencies we work with carry talent that came from the marketing side. And many of the agencies that we work with, because of their size, use senior talent to support their clients' needs. So while it may feel unique to that agency, at the end of the day, there are lots of agencies telling the same story. So given all that, I find it really interesting that most agency principals think their positioning is very different from other agencies in the market. And I think this is partly because they operate in a bit of a vacuum, not really seeing how other agencies present themselves because they are so wrapped up in the day-to-day things they need to do to keep their agency running and growing. When we asked, what agencies think about relative to their own brand positioning, we had 85% of agencies feel like their own positioning was either somewhat or very differentiated. So again, interesting that these same agency principals, I think how they talk about themselves is different, also think that the agency, not them of course, but the universe, the industry all look the same. 78% of agencies said that they felt that the agency community as a whole isn't well differentiated. And really this is very consistent with what we see in the market and not surprising, as most agencies do typically have overlapping services and most agencies talk about themselves the same way. So while much of the success that agencies experience is driven by the relationship they develop with their clients and the success of the work that they ultimately deliver to them, an agency's website and an agency's positioning can contribute more to the overall success of an agency when prospecting for new business. And when we reach out to prospects on behalf of our marketing agency clients at RSW, we're trying to sell the unique value that our agency client delivers. And if the website doesn't line up with that value, what we're selling, it's of little to no value. And we've seen situations where an agency site really isn't aligned, it isn't up to speed, and we see a prospect we've talked with visit the client's site only to bounce off of it as quickly as that it took them to get there. So finding that USP, that unique selling proposition for your agency and carrying it across all touch points is absolutely key. And we've tried to do, what we've tried to do over the last 21 years running this business is help shape more compelling and differentiating positioning for our clients. It's part of every new engagement. We call them brand stories, communication strategies, really tapping into all of the exposure that I personally have had and working with so many different firms. We've worked with hundreds of agencies over the years and have seen a lot of what agencies do and don't do well. We've seen a lot of sameness and some measure of uniqueness among the firms we represent. Some agencies really get it and others just are kind of stuck in the past. Frankly, I think just like with any meaty decision a company might have to make, like a client of yours or even your own agency, Looking beyond your own four walls is the best way to go. But that's not what most agencies have employed to help shape their agency's brand. 85% of agencies in the survey that we just released on positioning and AI searchability, 85% of agencies say they develop their positioning by using their own internal resources, kind of like Anderson Partners did back in the early years of our business. And only 15% of agencies used outside resources to help them define their brand's positioning. So in some respects, it's no surprise that we are where we are. And while testing positionings among prospects is something that about 20% of the agencies in our survey said they've done to refine their positioning, which is kind of an interesting idea, we caution doing the same among existing clients, which is something about a quarter of the agencies in our survey have done. The reason for the caution in screening positioning ideas with existing clients is that what you're going to get back from them might not help you when making that first contact with a new firm. What we've seen come back from exercises like this are things any agency can say about themselves. And most clients will say about their agency, like they're smart, hardworking, strategic, a great partner, or at least certainly we hope that that's what your agency would say about you. Again, all really good things, but not stuff that's going to win the day when prospecting for new clients. And while I'd like to think that the brand stories that I've created over the years have been different and better than what an agency can do on its own, I knew with the advent of AI, there had to be a better way. So by combining my experience, expertise, perspective with a more objective look at an agency's positioning and its readiness for AI-mediated search was going to put us in a better place. And that's where our AI brand compass model comes into play, which we'll talk about in a bit. So just jumping back to our positioning and AI readiness survey report, when we asked marketing agency principals how consistently does your positioning show up across key touch points such as website, LinkedIn, proposals, and marketing materials, 83% said usually or always, which is great. While agency positionings may not be, the best in terms of defining a unique space that only they can own, agencies are doing a really good job of consistently representing that positioning across multiple channels, which is so important. We are big believers in redundancy here at RSW US. We know it takes anywhere from 7 to 14 touches, sometimes more, just to get a prospect to take notice. And as they notice you, you want them to see consistency in how you talk about your firm and what the prospect ultimately sees as they travel from your site to LinkedIn, to Instagram, to your blogs. Reinforcing your positioning consistently is an important step in the world of new business. And it's not something, Reading, and so is Reading your site, for AI mediated search. And that is not something that agencies have either taken the time to do or know how to do well enough to their own site. And while the vast majority of agencies are well aware of the emerging standards for AI search visibility, with 61% saying that they're very or extremely aware of emerging standards for AI search visibility, only 11% feel that their agency sites are optimized for AI-mediated search. And this is just yet another case of the cobbler's children syndrome, where agencies rightly spend more of their time helping their clients and far less of their time helping themselves. It's how and why we started our outsourced agency new business firm, RSW US. Agency principals simply don't have the bandwidth or the inclination to dedicate time to supporting a new business effort beyond pulling in leads via networking and referrals. And in our 2026 New Year Outlook report released in the first quarter of this year, we unearthed a couple interesting things about sources for agencies' new business. So the once reliable sources like networking referrals were on the decline. Outbound outreach was remaining relatively stable, and search was on the up. Not significantly, but somewhere in the neighborhood of about 20% of agencies stated that their new business came from marketers finding them online. So being ready with a solid, well-differentiated positioning and a solidly optimized site that reinforces that positioning at all points on the site, not just a homepage, is going to help AI-mediated platforms like Claude and ChatGPT find out about your agency brand. And that's where the AI brand compass model has proven to be a great assist to me as I help shape agency positionings. It's created using hundreds of agency inputs, applying our 21 years of experience assisting agencies with their positioning and the marketing of their brands to help agencies create more authoritative and unique positionings, and also help them improve the searchability of their site by recommending specific content changes that they can employ to improve their likelihood of being found. So far, the reception and the performance of the model has been positive. We applied the model to our own RSW agency search site in and around the middle of May. The web traffic to the site has been solid. We're seeing increased and sustained traffic among unique new visitors coming to our site. And while we're not, setting the world on fire just yet, we're seeing an increase in inquiries among prospective marketing clients looking for us to help them find a new agency, which is a business that RSW Agency Search is in. As I mentioned early on, we're now applying the model to all new clients when they come on board to work with us on the outsourced agency new business side of the world. We recently completed a diagnostic for a new client. They made the changes recommended by the model, and then we ran the agency site through the model again. And the second time around, it really walked away with flying colors on the assessment of their site. So clearly, the model is sensitive enough to recognize changes on client websites and then in the market that could influence how an agency's site is read. And, brand story depth here, one of the dimensions that it evaluated this client's site around improved from an established sort of identity to a really defining sort of component of the client's positioning, indicating its positioning was much more complete now with the changes. And then there were some concerns in the first run through about the homepage declaring more of a service tactical view and not a world, more strategic view. That concern vanished with the changes made by the agency, sort of reinforcing that the fact that the agency's positioning was much stronger. And while Defy Ordinary, which is part of sort of the positioning of the brand, was consistently used throughout the site, in the second run of the agency site, the model suggested that on the About page, they strengthen the AI-mediated read from just an irreverent voice, quote unquote, to an irreverent voice in service of a specific belief, again, to further shore up the brand's positioning. And lastly, while subjective in nature, clients have found that the value of the output from both the positioning optimization and a search optimization standpoint to be very helpful and very positive. And this is one recent client quote talking about the value that she got out of the AI brand compass model. Said, I was really impressed by the output of the model. It gave us a clear picture of where our positioning was already strong and where the way we communicated on the website could be sharpened to better align with how prospects discover and evaluate agencies today via AI search. The recommendations were practical, actionable, and relatively simple to implement, and have given me, our client, confidence that they're ready to start prospecting. So all good stuff. So just a quick recap here. Positioning is central. It's a central tenet that should not be ignored or taken lightly by agencies, particularly given the sources like networking, referrals aren't delivering as many fresh prospects as they used to. And approaches like outbound outreach like we do and AI search are either on the level or rising in importance on helping agencies win new business. The problem is often what an agency thinks is unique is a lot of the same stuff other agencies are using. And too often, agencies think that their approach, their process, or way of talking about what they do is different, and most of the time it isn't. So you really, as an agency, have to look beyond the expected and find things that you can own. Maybe it's a process. Maybe it's a distinct and ownable source of insights. Maybe it's a unique approach to marketing, or maybe a commonality or a thread line that cuts across all of your clients that can be leveraged as you reach out to other prospects, just to name a few. And while you can try all this on your own, at the end of the day, it's probably best to get some outside help, and not just from a live body with lots of experience, but also a solution that can look at your positioning and your site objectively and specifically give you content and structure perspective and recommendations that are actionable and helpful in moving your business forward. And this is, one good place to start. We created what we call the Agency Identity Guide. I can send you all a link to this if you're interested. What it does is it dives into the 5 core elements you need to make your brand stand out, and also takes a deep dive into the 10 actionable ways to optimize how AI search engines read and represent your agency. So, definitely a good place to start to get you thinking about positioning and searchability a little bit differently than you might be doing otherwise. So again, really appreciate you all making the time today. If you're interested in the AI brand compass model, either as a standalone purchase, which you can sort of, we can help you separate from our programs, or as part of our outsourced agency new business program, just drop me a line at Mark, M-A-R-K, at rsws.com, or you can call me at 513-293-6785. Again, thanks so much for making the time today. And don't forget to be found and be unique. Thanks a lot, and have a great rest of your day.